So today we're going to be talking about earthworms. As long as I can remember, I've always been told about the benefits that earthworms provide for the overall soil structure. Things like fertility and aeration are just a couple that come to mind. Earthworms break down organic matter that makes it more suitable for microbes to then break down even further, releasing nutrients back into the soil. Plants are then able to take up those nutrients and utilize them. Also, worms create burrows while they move through the soil, creating a more desirable habitat for root growth. However, some of these benefits can create problems when new species are introduced to new environments. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of earthworms in North America. During the last ice age in North America, the glaciers pretty much wiped out the native populations of earthworms. This pretty much opened up a lot of niches for invasive species such as the European earthworm and the Asian earthworms, otherwise known as jumping worms. So, how did these non native species end up in North America? A lot of it is from the import and export of plants. These worms can be found in root balls or the overall containers that these plants are shipped in. Also, these invasive worms are used for fishing bait and they are shipped to non native areas. So, what effects are we seeing? Most effects are taking place in the northeastern and midwestern parts of the United States. A study that I looked at correlated earthworm biomass, leaf litter, and salamander abundance. Basically, this study found that with increased biomass of earthworms, the volume of leaf litter was decreased, and with decreased leaf litter, that also showed decreased salamander abundance. So, to bring this study full circle, it shows that invasive earthworms like European earthworms and Asian earthworms are driving down the population of salamanders. This finding is actually kind of ironic because adult salamanders actually use earthworms for a food source. However, juvenile salamanders look more for arthropods for a food source. And leaf litter is actually the habitat that arthropods need to survive. So, without the arthropods having a habitat to survive, the juvenile salamanders are unable to survive and reach maturity. Another study looked at the impacts of these invasive species on the undergrowth of native forest. What this study found was that the more abundant that these invasive species were, the more it affected the nutrition cycles between plants and the soil. Large amounts of inorganic nitrogen was related to the presence of this species, making that resource unusable for plants. Species interactions were also impacted. Because of the large consumption of leaf litter that these worms do, it causes a habitat destruction for microbes and fungi. Therefore, symbiotic relationships between microbes, fungi, and native fauna would likely decrease. Another thing that the study found was the rapid growth of the Asian earthworm's biomass between one season, as you see here on the graph to your left. The rapid growth in biomass outcompetes any other native and non-native earthworm in the same habitat. The Asian earthworm is more of an R strategist, and it is able to reach maturity and reproduce at very fast rates. Because of these traits, Asian earthworms are the prime candidate to be an invasive species. So, what can we do to manage this invasion of earthworms? Unfortunately, there are very few management options for areas that already have an established population. Therefore, we need to focus our efforts in areas that do not have established population and try to control the spread of this invasive species. A couple things that we can do to slow or even stop the spread is to enforce rules and regulations on import and export plants, ensuring that invasive species are not present within the plant or within its shipping container. Another thing you can do if you are using worms for fishing bait, try and figure out what species you actually have before you release them out into the wild. If you cannot figure out what species you have, or if you do have a non-native or invasive species, it is recommended to take those, put them in a Ziploc bag, and throw them in the trash. Thank you for your time, and here is my references.